Welcome to the last part of our study of the letter O, in which we shall see what amazing things happen when it is juxtaposed with other vowels, and indeed with itself in double O. First, let's get the distinct sounds out of the way, which are commonly words combined with the prefix CO, which always has the long O1 sound.
Sometimes, but not always, a hyphen is used to show that the prefix is not to be merged in sound with the root of the word, particularly if the following letter is also the vowel O.
You will see, for example, both cooperative and cooperative, whereas you will never see a hyphen in coincidence.
Listen to some more examples of the distinct sounds of these prefixes when followed by different vowels, and note that the prefix PRO, unlike co, is very seldom followed by a vowel.
Coagulate,
Coalesce,
coaxial,
coeducational,
coexistence,
coefficient,
coincidence,
coition,
cooperation,
counite.
proactive.
Now you say those words.
Besides words with the prefixes CO and PRO, there are some others in which the letter O is distinctly sounded when followed by a vowel, notably poem, poet, poetry, and poetic.
Note that the first three of those words, in which the following E is unstressed, have the long O1 sound followed by the short E2 ivy sound. Poem, poet, poetry. But when the main stress moves to the letter E in poetic, that letter has the short E1 sound. And don't be tempted to imitate affected people who pronounce poem without saying the E at all, just the long O1, as though it rhymed with home, poem. It's very irritating. Now here's a nice little sentence to practice. Listen.
Coincidentally, both poets' poems made poetry their theme.
Now you tell us about this coincidence in two poets' unusual choice of poetry as a poetic theme for their poems.
We also find distinct sounds in some foreign names, like those of the Borzoi dog, Goa in India, or the country Croatia.
In the girls' names Zoe and Chloe, which are from Greek.
And especially in classical and biblical names like Laocoon or Boaz and Moab.
And that splendid Old Testament character Jeroboam, who has given his name to the very large size of champagne bottle you will be able to afford when your career has taken off as a result of doing this course. Listen as we order one now from the barmaid, Chloe.
Open a Jeroboam of Croatian champagne at once, Chloe.
Now you order the Jeroboam of bubbly from Chloe while you are still sober, as it sounds as though it will be quite a party.
Except in a very few cases where the two letters are pronounced distinctly, as in proactive and coaxial, the combination OA almost always makes a fully merged sound, which in turn is almost always the long O1 sound of bone or home, unless followed by R, in which case the sound is the long O4 of bore or score.
Listen to some examples of the usual merged OA combination followed by different letters. First we'll have words in which OA has the long O1 sound.
Goad, load, road, toad, woad, loaf, oaf.
Coach, poach, roach, cockroach, brooch.
Cloak, croak, oak, soak, coal, foal, goal.
Foam, gloaming, loam, roam, groan, loan, moan, roan.
Soap, boast, coast, roast, toast, loat, boat, coat.
Float, goat, moat, oats, throat, coax, hoax.
Now listen to some examples of OA with a long O4 sound. Bore, haw, hoary, hoard.
Or, raw, saw, board, blackboard.
Boardroom, outboard, overboard, sideboard.
I should also mention the ancient British Queen Boadicea, who led a revolt against the Roman occupation in the 1st century AD, and whose statue in her war chariot you'll find on the Thames Embankment in London.
It is fashionable nowadays to use the name the Romans used for her, Boudica, but this is pretentious. A language robust enough to call Roma Rome and Bruxelles Brussels should not be afraid to keep the old traditional spelling and pronunciation of the name of one of its own queens.
And she probably painted herself with woad, the blue plant dye beloved of the Druids, which is another OA word, which we couldn't resist putting in the list of examples.
Now you say those two groups of OA words, not forgetting Queen Boadicea.
But there are, of course, exceptions, the principal one being broad, and words derived from it like abroad, broadcast, and Broadway.
As you have just heard, these have the long A3 and AU1 sound, as in all, ord, or fraud. Be careful to distinguish between the long O1 sound of board and the long A3 of broad.
Listen to a sentence that will help us practice the long O1 sound of OA.
Ramona's old hotel boasts goat's milk soap that foams and floats in the bath.
Now you tell us about the dubious delights of the old hotel with its foaming and floating goat's milk soap.
And let's have another sentence to practice both the main merged sounds of OA, which are equivalent to long O1, as in oak, and long O4, as in board.
The exceptional long O3 sound we find in broad and its derivatives.
And the distinct sounds the letters have in words like Croatia. Watch and listen carefully.
Broadcasting from abroad, the Croatian cooperatives hoaxed the coal board about the soaring price of loam and oak.
It was fun thinking up that ludicrous but useful sentence. You try it now.
We discussed one of the merged sounds of the vowel combination OE under long E1 when we noted that it used to be the regular spelling of words derived from the ancient Greek combination omicron iota, as in economics and ecumenical, which nowadays have dropped the O and are spelt economics and ecumenical, and for that reason are frequently mispronounced as though the initial E were short E1.
The OE spelling still holds on, however, in our old friend diarrhea.
Also in enology, the study of wine.
In medical terms like edema.
And in Greek names like Oedipus, Phoebus and Phoebe. Though remember that the girls' names Zoe and Chloe are English representations of different Greek letters, and their vowel sounds are distinct both in Greek and in English.
Note also the grammatical term onomatopoeic, which describes words deriving from the sound of their associated action, like splash. It can also be pronounced onomatopoeic, which is less good but more often heard.
We also noted that most words ending in OE have the long O1 sound, as in dough, foe, ho, joe, oboe, row, slow, toe, woe, and mistletoe.
But there always have to be exceptions, which are the long O2 sound in shoe and the similar single merged sound of the three vowel combination in the second syllable of maneuver.
But the OE sound you hear most often is the short O3 sound of only one word, but a very common one, does. It is, of course, the third person singular of the present tense of the verb do, not the plural of the noun doe, which is a female deer or rabbit.
Now listen to a pair of sentences with all these sounds in it.
I'm afraid that for once we lack the ingenuity to get them all into a single sentence.
Chloe's shoe doesn't fit Phoebe.
Joe doesn't have diarrhea, but Zoe does.
Now you say those two sentences about Chloe and Phoebe and Joe and Zoe and their problems with shoes and diarrhea.
When O is followed by I, it very rarely produces a fully merged sound. The two vowels are generally distinct, the sounds usually being the short O1 of on, followed by the short I1 of in, as in oil or point. Though in one or two compound words like coincidence and the participle going, we have long O1 followed by short I1.
Where, as is usually the case, a stressed short O1 is followed by an unstressed short I1, as in oil and point, you need only make the short O1 sound, and as you raise your chin again, you find yourself automatically making the unstressed short I1 sound. Watch and listen carefully to these examples. Oil,
Boil,
coin,
point,
disappoint,
anoint.
ointment.
And we shall find the same sound again with OY in words like boy, toy, and oyster.
But on the rare occasions when we have stressed long O1 followed by short I1, as in coincidence and coition, the lips which you have pushed forward to make the long O1 sound need to be pulled back and the mouth widened slightly to make the short I1, which in those words has the same stress as the preceding O.
The same happens with the present participle ending ing following verbs ending in one of the long O sounds, whether the long O1 of going or the long O2 of doing or booing.
Watch the mouth shapes and movements carefully now. Coincidence,
Coition,
going,
doing.
booing.
Now you say those words exactly as we did. Then we'll do more practice with the much more usual pronunciation of the juxtaposed letters OI.
Listen now to more examples of what is much the most common category of OI words, those which have the stressed short O1 followed by the unstressed short I1.
Anoint, point, appoint, disappoint.
Aneroid, avoid, celluloid, devoid, hemorrhoid,
Ovoid, rheumatoid, steroid, tabloid, thyroid, typhoid, void.
foible, boil, coil, doily, foil, oil, soil, toil,
Barenboim, coin, groin, join, joint, loin, coin, ointment.
foist, hoist, joist, moist, poison, boisterous, roister.
dacoit, goiter, hoity-toity, introit, coit.
And we now have a new coinage, the term VoIP, standing for Voice over Internet Protocol.
As mentioned at the beginning, there are very few words in which OI produces a merged sound, and they are mainly French adoptions into English. But here are three interesting and useful examples.
The word choir has the long I1 sound, as in climb. Choir.
It is exactly the same sound as the word choir, which used to be used for both a group of singers and for an amount of paper. But except in very old church service books, choir is now used only by stationers, and the singers have choir to themselves.
The last syllable of the word reservoir rhymes with R and car, the long A2 sound.
And ladies going to expensive hairstylists will wish to discuss their coiffure, in which the first syllable sounds like the QUA of quack.
Listen again to these three words.
Choir,
Reservoir.
coiffure.
Now you say those words exactly as we did.
And now for one of our splendid sentences to practice OI. Watch and listen very carefully now.
Coincidentally, Dr. Barenboim made an appointment for the choir boy's joints to be anointed with an oily steroid ointment to avoid rheumatoid poisoning.
I wonder how the choir boy injured himself. Perhaps it was playing rugby. Anyway, you tell us now what arrangements Dr. Barenboim made for the treatment of the choir boy's joints to avoid rheumatoid poisoning.
Unlike double E, which has only the one possible sound, the same as long E1, as in feet, double O can have four sounds, two short, as in foot and blood,
And too long, as in spoon and floor.
Let's start with the most common sound made by double O and call it double O1. It is the same as the long O2 sound of do, who, and what we call the three twos. Two, two, and two.
We also noted then that this sound was much more commonly produced by double O than any other combination.
Listen now to some of the many examples of double O1, starting with some words ending in double O. Bamboo,
Boo,
coo,
goo,
loo,
moo,
kangaroo,
too,
Waterloo,
woo,
yahoo.
zoo.
Now you say those words ending in double O, which has the double O1 sound.
Now we'll have some more examples, this time with a variety of consonants following the double O1. We can't practice this sound too often in view of the raging epidemic of bilious pigeon disease that is afflicting it.
Brood, food, mood, voodoo.
Canoodle, doodle, oodles, poodle.
Hoof, roof, tooth, spoof.
Soothsayer, boogie woogie, google, hoogly.
Cool, drool, fool, pool, tool.
Boom, doom, groom, loom, zoom.
Boon, croon, goon, loon, moon, noon.
Afternoon, soon, spoon, poltroon.
Coop, cooper, group, hoop, loop.
Poop, sloop, stoop, troop, whoop.
Boar, boorish, moor, poor.
Goose, loose, loosen, moose, noose.
Boot, coot, cahoots, footling, hoot, loot, moot, root, shoot, toot.
Booze, snooze, ooze, woozy, snooker, gobbledygook.
An expert on animals, by the way, is nowadays usually and better pronounced zoologist, with each O having respectively the distinct sound of long O2, short O1 and short O2, though the older pronunciation, zoologist, in which the first O was long O1, as in oologist, an expert on birds' eggs, is arguably more correct and certainly closer to the Greek origin of the word.
Oodles is a lovely word, by the way, meaning lots and lots of something, especially money. The colloquial word for which is boodle. Mm-hmm. You could say of a rich friend with money to burn that he has oodles of boodle.
And the word footling is an interesting oddity. It comes from the largely disused verb footle, meaning to act or speak foolishly, and its sound is the long O01 sound, as in fool, rather than the short O02 sound of foot that we shall come to next.
For the present, let's try and fill a sentence with 001 words, and we'll include footling too. Listen carefully now.
The drooling, footling, foolish poltroon brooded gloomily, boozing and snoozing boorishly all afternoon.
Now you tell us about this singularly unpleasant sounding character.
Except for the word woman,
and I'm sure the unpleasant person just described must have been a man,
the O02 sound we're coming to now would be a new one, for it is not made by A, E or I, or any combinations of those vowels, though we'll hear it again several times from now on, as it is found in the combination OU in would and should.
and by the letter U alone in words like bull and push.
And although we have already practiced pronouncing woman, we want to be very sure that you make no mistakes with so important a sound and word.
Remember how we make the sound. You begin with your mouth relaxed, your lips making a small O shape, and the tip of your tongue pressing against the gum behind your bottom front teeth. Then you produce a puff of air from the back of your mouth, and as you do so, you push your lips forward and raise your lower jaw slightly in a cartoon kiss. Watch and listen as we do it.
Good, would, should.
Wool, wolf, full, pull, woman.
Be very careful to avoid the increasingly common mistake, heard so often now on the BBC, of saying good as though it had the short O2 ivy sound.
Listen carefully as I perpetrate this horror, and note the lazy mouth shape. Good. This is horribly, horribly, horribly wrong because ivy, remember, can never be stressed.
Watch and listen again as we make the sound and say our practice words correctly. Good, would, should.
Wool, wolf, full, pull, woman. Now listen and watch carefully as we give you a fuller list of examples.
Good, hood, stood, would, foot.
Wool, woolly, woolen.
Book, brook, cook, crook, crooked.
Hook, look, nook, rook, shook, took.
Forsook, mistook, partook, soot.
Wolf, cook.
Now you repeat those words and note the surnames Wolf and Cook, as in Virginia Woolf and Captain Cook.
Listen now to a sentence containing several 002 words.
Hooded and crooked, Virginia Woolf's sooty cook stood and looked at the good book.
Now you say this funny little sentence.
And in case you don't know, the good book is another name for the Bible.
The other two sounds that double O can make are found in very few words.
The 003 sound is the same as the short O3 sound of son and mother. We find it now in blood and flood, and we shall find it again when we come to the letter U in words like mud, bud, and under.
Watch and listen carefully again to these two 003 words, together with some short O3 words.
Blood,
Flood,
mother,
son.
wonder.
Now you say those words exactly as you've just heard them.
We find the last of our 00 sounds in door and floor, which have the same sound as the long O4 words tore and saw. And like 003, this 004 sound is not common.
Listen again to the sound. Floor, door, tore, saw.
Now you repeat those 4 words. And note that this sound is one of the many which the combination OU can make, as we shall see and hear shortly.
And now for a rather gruesome sentence to practice all 4 of the 00 sounds.
A pool of blood flooded the wooden floor and oozed under the cook's poor mother's bedroom door.
Now you tell us about this gloomy scene. It is not an easy sentence, so take it slowly with the help of the references first. Then, when you feel confident, see if you can do it from the following plain text.
And before we leave the 00 sounds, note that words like poor, moor, and moorish, which we have been pronouncing with the 001 sound rhyming with pool or fool, can also be correctly pronounced with the 004 sound of door and floor to make poor, more, and moorish.
This last word then rhyming with the funny adjective moorish, meaning so delicious to eat that you want more.
And now we come to the last vowel partner of the letter O, the combination OU.
There are very few words in which these letters have a distinct sound when juxtaposed as they do in the unusual word co-united. Almost always OU produces a single merged sound.
And you may like to make yourself a strong cup of coffee before attacking this vowel combination, as it can have no less than 10 different sounds.
Even excluding that ultimate eccentric hiccup.
Our first merged sound, OU1,
which we've just heard in the word sound,
is the most common of the OU sounds, and we have practiced it already in the form of short O4, as in cow and allow. You'll remember we described it as the sound you make if someone treads hard on your bare toe. Ow!
You could equally well have shouted, ouch.
You open your mouth slightly and comfortably with your tongue behind your bottom front teeth. Then you expel the air from the back of your palate while dropping your chin and bringing it back again to resume the original mouth shape.
And once again, beware of the lovesick tomcat syndrome. Meow! You must not widen your mouth at all or stick your chin out.
Watch and listen as we make the sound.
Ow.
Ouch!
Out.
Mouth.
South.
Sound.
Now you copy those sounds.
And here's a useful list of words to practice in which the OU1 sound precedes different consonants.
We've underlined the stressed syllables in polysyllabic words.
About,
Bout,
clout,
devout,
flout,
grout,
lout,
out,
outside,
without,
outer,
outwards,
pout,
rout,
scout,
shout,
snout,
spout,
sprout,
stout,
tout,
trout,
doubt,
redoubt,
cloud,
loud,
shroud,
noun,
bound,
abound,
boundary,
found,
foundry,
ground,
hound,
mound,
pound,
expound,
impound,
redound,
sound,
resound,
round,
around,
surround,
foul,
douse,
house,
louse,
mouse,
nouse,
souse,
spouse,
joust,
oust,
carouse,
rouse,
blouse,
thousand,
count,
county,
account,
accountant,
mount,
paramount,
mountain,
fountain,
bounty,
bow,
plough,
slough,
drought,
couch,
debauch,
grouch,
ouch,
pouch,
slouch,
vouch,
voucher,
gouge,
mouth,
south.
louth.
Now you say those words, all of which have the OU1 sound. Isn't stout a good word? Its sound really does seem to convey its meaning.
It reminds me of a little song we used to sing in nursery school, which is ideal for practicing OU1. Listen and watch as I perform it, for it has actions that go with it. I'm a little teapot, short and stout. Here's my handle, here's my spout. When the cups begin to shout, just tip me up and pour me out.
Now it's your turn, and if you want to do the actions, go ahead. You can see us, but we can't see you.
And now we'll have a little sentence to practice OU1. Listen.
His stout, grouchy spouse slouched about the house, shouting loudly and pouting for hours, until he pounced on her and clouted her soundly.
It sounds like Petruchio in Shakespeare's The Taming of the Shrew.
Now you tell us how this politically incorrect but clearly provoked husband clouted his stout and unamiably grouchy spouse.
And note that while the addition of the troublesome letter R to a vowel or vowel combination has often seemed to modify the vowel sound to such an extent that it deserved a separate category, we didn't think it necessary to make a special category where OU1 is followed by R, as in devour, hour, sar, or scar.
The vowel sound does not actually change, and the R sound is little more than the sound made by our ubiquitous girlfriend Ivy, except where it is followed by another vowel, whether in the same or a following word. Compare, for example, scar with scouring or scour out.
We'll examine this in greater detail when we get to the letter R itself. For the moment, let's just note that long OU1 is not the only sound that OU can make when followed by R, as we shall soon see and hear when we come to OU4.
And indeed, you have just heard it in the number 4.
The OU2 sound, which is the sound almost always made by the combination OU-GHT, is the same as the long A3 sound of all or dawn, and of the combination AU-GHT as in fraught or taught.
Note, however, that OU can produce this sound only when followed by GHT, whereas in the case of AU, it has the same sound in taught, taught, and audio.
Now listen to a fairly full list of the OUGHT words, and you will see that many of them are strong past tense forms of verbs, as with brought, the past of bring,
Or bought, the past of buy. Bought,
brought,
fought,
thought,
sought,
naught,
ought.
wrought.
Now you say those words, noting the silent W in wrought.
And here's a little sentence to practice the sound. Listen carefully now.
I thought I ought to have brought what I bought.
Now you tell us what you thought you ought to have brought.
But of course there are exceptions to every rule, and remember that drought, despite ending in GHT, has the OU1 sound, as in plough.
Now a very important warning, which is not a matter of pronunciation, but vital for good English, for there is little point in pronouncing rubbish clearly and attractively.
Be very careful to avoid the common mistake of saying didn't ought instead of ought not or oughtn't for the negative past.
Unfortunately, you will often hear, they didn't ought to have done it.
Instead of the correct form, they ought not or oughtn't to have done it.
And let's have one more practice sentence before we go on to the next sound. Listen carefully now.
Ought they or oughtn't they to plough the ground in a drought?
Now you ask what they ought or ought not to do about ploughing the ground in a drought. See if you can do it straight away from the following unmarked text. They will put both texts on the screen.
Our OU3 sound is the same as the long O1 sound, as in the name of the letter O, and when you read and listen to the following list of examples, you will see that the OU-GH combination can also occasionally produce this OU3 sound, as in although, as well as the OU1 sound that we found in words like plough and bow. Listen carefully to these examples.
Although,
Though,
mould,
moulder,
boulder,
shoulder,
smoulder,
sole,
molt.
poultry.
Now you say those words.
Listen now to the words yaw and caught. Here we have another sound that OU can make when followed by R, besides the OU1 sound of R. We'll call it OU4.
It's the same as the long O4 sound of more and before, and the double O4 sound of floor and door.
Listen to the following examples. Caught,
Forecourt,
for,
14,
paw,
morn.
yaw.
Now you say those OU4 words.
And now listen to a couple of practice sentences with OU3 and OU4 sounds. Here's the first one.
Pour more gold into your mould.
Now you tell them to pour more gold into their mould.
And here's the second sentence to practice OU3 and OU4 together. Listen carefully again.
Your poultry had molted 4 times before.
Now you tell us about the poultry that had molted 4 times before.
And before we go on to OU5, let's bring in OU1 and OU2 to join OU3 and OU4 in a sentence. Watch and listen carefully.
Although we thought the 4 hounds we'd bought had been trained, they bounded out of the house into the courtyard, devoured our poultry, and fought for hours.
To use an appropriately canine colloquialism, we were sold a pup, meaning that we were defrauded. I think we should demand our money back, don't you?
Anyway, it's your turn now to express our disappointment with the 4 untrained hounds we bought. Use the marked text first, then the following plain version.
The OU5 sound is the same as the long O2 in what we call the 3 twos. Two, two, and two.
There are relatively few OU5 words, and quite a number of them are adoptions from the French. For example, nougat, bouquet, rouge, or coup, which have not been anglicised.
In making this sound, remember what we stressed when we practiced making the long O2 sound. Make sure that you push your lips forward when you make it. Don't widen your mouth or tighten your lips, otherwise you'll find yourself crooning like a bilious pigeon.
Listen again to the word you, as you increasingly hear it mispronounced these days. Then to the correct sound, and watch the mouth shapes carefully. You, 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 you.
You, 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 you.
Now here's a list of more OU5 words to practice, beginning with the more common ones, and note that throughout has this OU5 sound in the first syllable, followed by OU1 in the second. You, youth, through, root, group, soup.
De, tour, bouquet, uncouth, throughout.
Acoustics, croup, recoup, ghoulish, croupier.
Louise, cougar, coup d'état, coupe Jacques.
Proust, souk, jewel, Houdini.
Outre, rouble, bijou, amour, paramour, pouf.
Pourboire, poussin, rouge, bougainvillea.
Cantaloupe, troupe, boudoir, couture.
Trousseau, mousse, nougat, petit four.
Now you say those OU5 words, which it can be embarrassing to mispronounce. And now listen to a practice sentence, this time from the world of casinos.
The door croupier recouped the youth's lost roubles.
Now you tell us what that dour but kind croupier did for the Russian youth who'd lost at the tables.
And here's a sentence bringing together all the 5 OU sounds we have practiced so far.
Louise poured out the poultry soup you'd brought, though your youth's group's uncouth louts loudly shouted out, "Foul!"
Oh dear, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but perhaps the foul soup really was foul and undrinkable.
And note how foul, meaning poultry, has the same sound as foul, meaning nasty.
Now you tell us how loutishly the uncouth and ungrateful youths from the youth group behaved when Louise poured out the poultry soup, and, as usual, try with the help of the references first, then read the sentence from the following plain text.
And note a couple of tricky words. Just as we had to be careful about wind, which relates to air, and wind, which is what you do to a clock, we need to distinguish wound, which is the past tense of the verb wind, and has the OU1 sound, from the verb wound, meaning to harm. Its past tense and past participle wounded, and its related noun a wound, all of which have the OU5 sound.
And don't forget that the past tense of the verb wind with short I1 is similarly winded. Someone is said to be winded when he has the breath driven out of him, after running hard perhaps, or after a blow to the stomach. And a hunting dog is said to wind its quarry when it catches its scent on the wind. Listen to a sentence to illustrate those different words in action.
They found the stupid lout winded by his fall from the tower and wounded by a blow on his head after he'd wound the big clock that was not his job to wind.
Now you say that rather unfeeling sentence, which this time has no markings to help you.
The combination OU is also one of the many vowels or vowel combinations that make the short O2 ivy sound of actor or second. We'll call it the OU6 sound.
It's most frequently found in the adjectival endings OUS, IOUS and EOUS, and in nouns ending in OUR, though it is also one of the sounds that can be made by OUGH and OUTH.
Listen to some examples, taking each of these word endings in turn. They are grouped into 3 batches. Here's the first one. Viscous, horrendous, rufous, anomalous.
Bibulous, jealous, scandalous, zealous.
Heinous, humus, ravenous, monotonous.
Amorous, carnivorous, dangerous, desirous.
Generous, timorous, treacherous, cadaverous.
Clamorous, dolorous, glamorous.
Humorous, rigorous, vigorous.
You'll notice that where the syllable immediately preceding the OUS ending is short and unstressed, its vowel, whichever it is, has the ivy sound. For example, the second A in scandalous, the E in ravenous, or the first O in rigorous.
But not the first U in bibulous, which is long, and in fact does have a little stress, even though the main stress is on the first syllable.
And before you practice that first batch of OU6 sounds, remember that the first syllable of heinous has a long A1 sound.
It is a common mistake to give it a long E1 sound and to misspell and mispronounce the second syllable by inserting an I before the OUS ending, as though it rhymed with genius.
Right then, off you go.
Now listen to the second batch, words ending in IOUS and EOUS. Audacious, avaricious, delicious, fallacious.
Gracious, hilarious, malicious, mendacious.
Nutritious, officious, precious, salacious.
Spacious, specious, vicious, voracious.
Contagious, various, ambitious.
Expeditious, infectious, anxious.
Courageous, herbaceous, outrageous, rampageous, hideous.
And before you practice that second batch of examples, note that hideous is exceptional among the EOUS words by having its E sounded. It is not a silent E needed to lengthen the preceding vowel, which is short.
The word has 3 distinct vowel sounds, short I1, short E4, and the short OU6 ivy sound of the OUS ending. But I'm afraid you will hear it mispronounced, as though it rhymed with outrageous, which is what such a hideous mispronunciation truly is. Listen again to the correct pronunciation. Hideous.
Hideous. Now you say all the words in that second batch.
And here's the last batch. Words ending in O-U-R, O-U-G-H, and O-U-T-H. Listen carefully now.
Arbor, barber, harbour, labour, belabour.
Neighbour, rigor, clamour, glamour.
Candour, colour, dollar, armour, favour.
Flavour, savour, savoury, behaviour, saviour.
Borough, thorough, Middlesbrough.
Bournemouth, Dartmouth, Plymouth.
Portsmouth, Yarmouth.
Now you say that final batch of OU6 examples.
And let's note one or two useful things. First, make sure that you learn the EOUS adjectival word endings and do not misspell them by giving them the much more frequent IOUS. You will see that most of the EOUS endings are from words which require the letter E to keep a preceding C or G soft, except for odd words like hideous.
Second, note how the OU1 sound of the word mouth changes to the OU6 ivy sound when it is no longer stressed in the names of the towns you have just heard in the last group of words, all of which, except Portsmouth, are taken from the names of the rivers at whose mouths they stand. It is the same principle that we observed with the words Ham and Ford when they become unstressed suffixes, as in Birmingham and Oxford.
Now note how the sound of the syllable often remains the same, but the letter U is dropped when nouns ending in OUR with the OU6 sound add the adjectival ending OUS, which also has the same OU6 sound. Study and listen to the following table.
Clamour, clamorous.
Rigour, rigorous.
Dollar, dolorous.
Tumour, tumorous.
Glamour, glamorous.
Vapour, vaporous.
Humour, humorous.
Vigour, vigorous.
The noun labour, however, drops its U and adds IOUS to make its adjective laborious, in which the I and the OUS components are sounded separately.
Note also how the stress moves from the first to the second syllable, with the result that the long A1 of labour becomes the unstressed short A2 ivy sound in laborious, and the newly stressed second syllable changes to long O1. It's the same change of stress and vowel sound as in victor and victorious.
Listen to the noun and adjective together. Labour, laborious. Now you say all our examples of OUR endings and their adjectives, noting particularly labour and laborious.
The adjective amorous also rhymes with the clamorous group of adjectives, but the noun amour, meaning a love affair, retains its French pronunciation, rhyming with tour.
And further to the dropping of the letter U by most OUR nouns, making adjectives by adding OUS, note that this does not happen with other adjectival endings. Adjectives like colourful, colourless, flavoursome, flavourless, humourless, and savoury retain the OUR of the basic nouns. And savoury, by the way, can also be used as a noun, meaning a dessert or snack that is not sweet.
In the American usage, of course, there is no letter U to drop in words like clamour or labour, which follow the spelling of the Latin originals, clamour and labour.
Now let's have a little fun, practicing these endings with a gloriously tongue-twisting poem we've written called Neighbours from Hell.
If gracious behaviour were only contagious, our neighbours might be less outrageous. We should, if we could, try to make them sagacious, less rough and less tough, less audacious. But they're so mendacious, salacious, rampagious, scandalous, bibulous, treacherous, hideous. To fight them would be rather dangerous and probably disadvantageous. For we are quite timorous, not very vigorous, and fear that our courage would fail us.
Do try saying this yourself now. It has some glorious long words to get your tongue round.
The OU combination can also make the short O3 sound of sun or done, which is the sound we also have exceptionally in the OE combination of does. Where it is made by OU, we'll call it OU7. Listen to the following examples. There are not very many of them.
Country,
Cousin,
couple,
double,
doublet,
Douglas,
trouble,
touch,
enough,
rough,
tough,
slough,
southern.
bruff.
And in case you're wondering, Bruff is a town in the north of England. Now you say those OU7 words.
And here's a practice sentence. Listen carefully now.
Douglas touched his troubled cousin's rough doublet.
Now you tell us how Douglas tried to comfort his troubled cousin with a sympathetic touch of his hand on his doublet.
And if in the list of OU7 examples you thought you heard SLOUGH pronounced differently earlier on, you were quite right. There are two identical looking but different words that are distinguished from each other solely by pronunciation.
The word slough with the OU7 sound, rhyming with tough, means the skin shed by a snake or by a person with a skin disease, or it can be used as a verb meaning to shed skin.
But slough with the OU1 sound means a marshy swamp, as of the terrible Slough of Despond of the Pilgrim's Progress, and in the name of the town Slough, not far from London, and built on what was indeed once a swamp.
As we mentioned earlier, when we looked at double O, the double O2 sound of words like good and would can also be made by a very few OU words like could, should and would. This is our OU8 sound.
We'll say these OU8 words again now, together with a few of their double O2 examples. Could,
Should,
would,
good,
stood,
would. Now you repeat those words, avoiding like the plague the ever more frequent mispronunciation of good with an ivy sound.
The ninth of the possible sounds of OU is again very rare, but also very simple.
The OU9 sound is the basic short O1 sound of doff or soft, and we find it made by a few OUGH combinations like cough and trough.
And this OU9 sound is the seventh possible sound that the OUGH combination can make, the others being the OU1 sound of bow or plough,
The OU3 sound of though,
the OU5 sound of through,
the OU6 ivy sound of thorough,
the OU7 sound of rough or enough,
and, but only when the combination is followed by T, the OU2 sound of ought, thought, or fought.
Let's therefore practice all 7 of the possible sounds that can be made by the OU-GH combination by putting them into one tremendous sentence. Listen, watch, and marvel at what you're about to hear, something that sprang fully armed from the fertile brains of our own Professor Higgins, like the goddess Athena from the head of Zeus.
Though brought up thoroughly rough and tough, the ploughman thought he'd had enough, coughing up blood in a horse trough in Slough, having fought through every county and borough in the country.
I wonder who he was. Perhaps he was one of Cromwell's soldiers in the English civil wars of the 17th century. Anyhow, it's your turn now to tell us about this tough young ploughman who'd had enough of fighting.
As usual, practice with the help of the marked text first. Then make sure you can read the sentence aloud correctly using the following unmarked text before you move on.
And here's another sentence, one that will appeal to investment bankers and business people. And this time, we're not helping you with a marked version.
Although they ought to have thought the acquisition through thoroughly, they were taught a tough lesson when they bought that company in Middlesbrough.
Now you tell us how those foolish people learnt the hard way that they ought always to think through an acquisition thoroughly, as mistakes in buying companies can be expensive.
The last of our OU sounds, OU10, is the sound we have heard already in the middle syllable of attorney, when Ursula took to the law in her long skirt and with her usual stressed expression.
It is the same as the long E2 sound of words like and heard, and similarly involves the letter R. Listen carefully now.
Journey,
Adjourn,
courtesy,
courteous,
discourteous.
scourge.
Now you repeat those words.
And note how the OU4 sound of court changes to OU10 in courtesy and courteous. Listen to this next sentence.
The attorney courteously requested adjournment of the court.
Now you tell us how the attorney in court courteously asked the judge for an adjournment.
And as though 10 were not enough for the possible pronunciations of the OU vowel combination, we can increase the total to 11 if we include the oddity hiccup, which is a common alternative spelling of hiccup and is pronounced the same.
Well, there we are, 10 sounds of OU without a hiccup. And after such a terrific fight to master so difficult a vowel, I think we should have a fighting sentence from the world of boxing. Let's sock this one to you.
Our county's strongest boxer thought about doing another bout, but couldn't go another 14 rounds so soon against so tough an opponent without worrying about reopening old wounds and losing to a former Yorkshire champion whom he'd fought and trounced so often before.
Wow, that sentence packs quite a punch. But I'm sure it won't have you on the ropes now you're in such good training. Out of your corner now and deliver a knockout blow by showing how smoothly you can explain our strongest boxer's decision.
And finally, we'll have our alpha and omega, by which I mean that we'll end with our opening sentence. Listen to it again.
According to George, the door to Flora's room won't open, so Bob O'Connor's now gone and told a woman worker she should go round to look through one of the 4 lower windows of the women's dormitories from outside.
Now you say this with all the aplomb of a grand finale.